Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax, and we are here today to talk about lots of really fun things, and we're just going to kind of see where this goes. But we were debating on whether to really focus today on emotions or thoughts, and so we thought that, no pun intended, instead we would start with something that's called the cognitive triad. Claudia, when was the last time the cognitive triad came up in your work with clients?
I mean, I think it's for me there always because that's kind of how I conceptualize, but I don't know if it's been um like a formal exercise.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have found it's like really eye-opening for a lot of people to see even just the diagram of it, right? And so if you guys are listening on or in at home, or in the car, and if you're in the car, don't do this, but like if you're home and you're someplace safe, you can either draw this out to kind of get a sense of what this is, or you can just imagine in your mind. It's a pretty simple diagram, but basically it's a triangle, right? So a three-pointed shape where at each point there are three words, and one point says thoughts, the other says feelings, and then the third says behavior, or some people will say actions, right? I also, from time to time, will insert the word body into that, which we can talk about in a minute too. But so the traditional cognitive triad is thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And basically, this is a way that some clinicians, researchers, theorists conceptualize and represent kind of the entirety of the human experience. So we can divide things into one of those three categories, right? So is it a thought that's happening? Is it a feeling or an emotion that's happening? Or is this a behavior or an action, something that we're doing with our body that's taking place? And I was telling Claudia, and she was surprised by this, right? So, like, I have a lot of clients when they see this or they hear this from me, adult clients who are really surprised by this and like mind blown for a minute. And like, it takes them a second to kind of look at that and just let that sink in, to think about the difference between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Because what I have heard and listened and observed from a lot of clients is that sometimes they accidentally like mistake one for the other. So for example, in therapy, right, often we'll ask questions like, what are your thoughts about that? Or how does that make you feel? Right? Or what did you do? Right? So each of those are just examples of questions that might allude to thoughts, feelings, or behavior, respectively. But sometimes if I ask about a thought, a client might give me a behavior as an answer. Or if I ask about a feeling, a client might give me a thought as an answer.
All the
Right.
time.
So, yeah, you have that too.
Yeah, I mean, sure, because we don't take the time to distinguish, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it can be so important to distinguish.
Hmm.
I remember when I was doing my own therapy work for the first time in my mid-20s, my therapist taught me some coping skills, which was interesting because I was a young therapist myself at the time, and gone through grad school and undergrad and knew coping skills and had a toolbox to teach my clients as well. But I remember being struck by trying to think my way through feelings, and having her say, you can't do that, Katie. You can't think your way out of this. And saying, to apply a thought as a solution to a feeling problem is like apples and oranges, right? You have to feel your way through emotions, and you have to think your way through thoughts, right? And then, obviously, maybe we could I feel like the whole like behavior slash body corner of the triangle is like a really kind of like big Pandora's box to open, right?
Yes.
Um, but so essentially, right? So it's important to know, like, is it that I'm thinking something? Am I feeling something? Is it both? Because then we can both communicate clearly, understand ourselves clearly, and then know kind of how to work with our experience.
Yes. I think sometimes the challenge is that some of those things happen so quickly that they
Mhm.
feel almost simultaneous. Maybe they are from like our awareness, right? That we don't always slow down to really to separate them.
Yeah.
I also, in my work with clients and, this week, I have been blown away lately by my adolescent clients. And I don't know if you've seen this too, but their emotional intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and their awareness of feelings surpasses like a lot of my adults. So I think about generationally, right? And then you look at my parents, like emotions weren't a thing. Like you did stuff and like nobody cared if you were happy, sad, or mad about it. You know what I mean? It was a very different era and time. So I do wonder how much sometimes, depending on our clients' own experiences in childhood, like how their parents kind of functioned emotionally, like how much we actually also have to work with creating education about what are emotions, like really what are they, right? You've got happy, mad, sad. Okay, most people can handle those, but it gets a little more nuanced, right? When you feel like that, like pang of jealousy, or and you take actions based on that feeling, right? But I don't know if we all have a starting point from that, right? So what do you do for clients that are just not there yet, right? Like they're not even like you start breaking down the triangle and you're on the feelings one, right? And
Yeah.
you're getting maybe some like primitive basic, like the basic feelings, like the big ones, but not really the ability to kind of really express what those feelings are, because
Mhm.
we can't assume everyone has that vocabulary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for me, I will often suggest something or use that as part of my reflection, right? So one of the skills therapists often uses what's called reflective listening, which is basically you listen to the client and then you kind of essentially repeat it back with some summary and some nuances, right? And typically it adds something, some sort of either clarification or extrapolation on what the client has shared so that it's helpful for them, right? And so I can imagine saying something like, wow, that sounds like it would be really frustrating, right? Or this is really sad, or this is a real grief for you, or,
Mhm.
example, et cetera, right? Like fill in the blank. But um, maybe that's one of the things that therapists can offer, right? Is to help with that feeling identification.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually, if you Google Wheel of Emotions,
I love that. I haven't seen that in so long. That's a
I
good,
have,
that's a
it's
goodie.
it's like a menu of
Yeah.
feelings and it's color coded and it's really pretty. And I have
Yeah.
actually given that to clients
Uh-huh.
and asked them to incorporate the like an assortment of the things on the wheel
Yep.
um, throughout the week, for example, because we do need to, if we're communicating to other people how we feel, or
Mhm.
even just for ourselves, like trying to understand ourselves better, if we can't identify that emotion,
Mhm.
then where do we go with that? You
Mhm.
know? So I love the feelings wheel. So you can Google it, feeling wheel or wheel of emotions, and there's lots of
Yeah.
pictures of it. You can like print out a copy and um,
That's so good. And I like the simpler ones better. I don't know about you, but I think before we started the podcast, you were talking about kind of core emotions or basic emotions. And I really love that. And I used to start a lot broader. Like when I worked with kiddos, I did a lot more with like the feelings wheel. But like now that I'm mostly adults and older teens, I really try to keep it a bit more simple. And there's so many different theories out there about how many emotions there are. You've got like Marianne Williams, who's like, is it Williams or Williamson? Which is it? Do you know
right.
who wrote A Course in Miracle?
I think it's William's son.
I think you're right. As
I
soon
think
as I said Williams, I was like, that's not right. Okay, Marianne Williamson, she writes that there's two emotions, right? There's love and there's fear, and that's it. And that everything else is a derivative of one of those two, and that we can whittle every other nuance down to, is this either love or is this fear, right?
Mhm.
I tend to like, oh gosh, how many do I like? I have to rattle them off and use my fingers. Happy, sad, angry, scared, confused, overwhelmed, and frustrated, and love. So that's like what, 8. And I use those. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I use those when I talk to little ones. And I use it when I talk to my daughter or when I talk to even like friends, kids, and stuff like that. Like just to kind of have a topic of conversation, right? I'm such a dork,
Yeah.
right? Like, but like talking through, okay, what's the thing in your life that makes you the most happy right now? But I like those happy, sad, what did I say? Happy, sad, angry, scared, confused, frustrated, overwhelmed, and I go back and forth between loved or loving, kind of what makes you feel the most loved or what makes you feel the most loving, right? Um, Basically what fills you with love, right? And I like that. I mean, I like those 8 personally. How many do you like? Do you like the big wheel or do you like a
Well,
smaller subset?
I like the wheel, but the
Mm-hmm.
wheel is basically just like, let's see, what core does this? So I'm looking at a wheel now. It's got strong, which is not one that I would choose clearly by my tone. So it's got strong, happy, mad, sad, fear, and calm.
Oh,
And then it has a whole bunch from those
yeah,
like
yeah.
those, it kind of spreads out. So I work a lot with little kids. So I'm really stuck at happy, mad, sad, scared.
Uh-huh.
Um, because when you're 4, that's what you got, right?
Yeah.
But even in my work with older kids, like I can put almost all the emotions into one of those. Because
Mm-hmm.
even for loved, like I feel loved, right? That would be under happy
Happy.
for a little kid. Um, it expands with, the older my clients are, but with the littles, that's kind of where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
But it is amazing that even really young children can figure out that sometimes I feel sad under angry,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like, yeah, I was mad, but I felt sad because my mom said no, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
really interesting when and maybe it's because they're more open and less um, encouraged to not be a certain way, right? Yet
Mhm.
that they can really identify
Yeah.
kind of the feeling under the feeling. Um,
Mhm.
I think as we get older, we get more socialized into what is appropriate or not appropriate for us to express, right? And so it's okay to be mad all the time, but you can't cry constantly because then there's something wrong with you, right? But there's
Oh,
not really a difference, right? Either way,
yeah.
you're flooded with emotion, Um,
Right.
but I
Or
do
vice
see
versa. Don't you see sometimes vice versa? Like where it's okay to be sad, right? And I think maybe I don't know if there's some gender differences here too. And I would guess that there's probably cultural differences and regional differences, but like I see a lot of women who have been socialized to your point that it's okay to be sad, right? Because that's a very like quiet emotion, right? That's very gentle, it's very um soft
Mhm.
versus angry, like, oh, I can't get angry, right? Like, I'm not supposed to be angry, right? If I'm angry, I'm too emotional, right? Or there's something wrong with me if I'm angry, or even like it's a sin to be angry.
Yeah,
Anger is too loud and it's too harsh and it's too abrasive and it's too opinionated, right?
yeah. But
Is
then
that
for
true?
men, right?
Mhm.
Speaking in broad stereotypes, right? But
Uh-huh.
then that's a more acceptable way to
Yeah.
be than to be tearful and crying.
Oh.
But it is societally influenced. It's influenced in your own family. I
Hmm.
remember when my kids were little, it would drive me nuts when like they would cry about something and someone would say, "Big girls don't cry," usually an older generation. And inside,
Uh-huh.
ooh, I like wanted to scream. I'm like, she can cry, they can cry, it's fine. Because so
Right.
much of how we express emotion as adults, I do believe is influenced by how the people around us when we were little were able to
Mhm.
manage the emotions. So if your
Right.
caretaker freaked out every time you cried, but were okay with you raging, maybe
Mhm.
you raged a little more because that was a safer expression, right?
Yeah. Or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Mhm.
Or maybe you don't express anything because no expression was okay.
Nothing was okay. That's
Right?
right.
Right? And so it's really interesting because there's so many factors to kind of
Mhm.
how we navigate our emotions as adults. But the framework is built when we're little,
That's
you know?
right. I know. I even catch my sweet husband, who is, obviously been married to a therapist for a long time, say to our 10-year-old sometimes, "Oh, don't get frustrated, baby. It's okay. Don't get frustrated." And I'll say, It's okay for her to feel frustrated, right? But she can feel what she feels, right? But maybe Ellie, don't maybe kick daddy's seat." Right? And then it goes to the behaviors, right? Of like,
Yeah.
okay, like maybe let's modify the behavior. Don't throw that across the yard per se. That
Yeah.
could break, but it's okay to be frustrated about that you can't get it to do what you want it to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, mhm.
Yeah, that permission to be, and this is, kind of this last week specifically, I think it comes up a lot all the time, and you probably find this too, but am doing so much work around giving my clients and getting them to give themselves permission to feel.
Mhm.
Like some version of what's wrong with me that I'm always this. I always feel this way comes out. Why am
Mhm.
I always frustrated? Why am I always sad? Right?
Yeah.
Um, I shouldn't feel jealous, but I do. It's like, but why?
Mhm.
Oh, it's okay to, right? There's a lot of like narratives I think we've gotten about I shouldn't feel this way.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm going to use this session to, abolish that feeling.
Mhm.
And my feeling is, okay, well, where do you think that's coming from? What's that
Right.
feeling telling you? Right? Why did it come up? Like feelings don't come up based out of nothing, right?
Mhm.
There's something that
Right.
happens or there's some interpretation of something that happens, right? So that kind of gets into the, is it an event that caused the feeling or is it your thoughts on the event that caused the feeling? Both
Mhm.
of those can be true,
Yeah.
right? Like sometimes something happens, it makes us feel a certain way, and then our brain kicks in and is like, what, wait, why do I feel that way? And then we kind of solve the problem for
Right.
ourselves. And then there's times when something happens, you don't have a feeling right away. You tell yourself a story about it, or like they
Mhm.
didn't call because they're mad at me, and now we have a feeling,
Right.
right? But so much work on like deep diving into that, right? And if it's the case, what is the feeling telling you if it kind of came up? Because
Mhm.
they are messages.
Mhm.
And I get so much feedback on, well, I shouldn't feel this way. I don't like, I want to go to therapy to get rid of all my feelings. And it's like, well, we're going to do the opposite, right? Because they're meant to be felt. They're meant to move through you as well, right? They're meant to happen. You be like, what's that about? Think about it, sit with it, let it come, and then let it go. And that's where I feel like a lot of our challenges come from is we either stuff it down, we ignore it, and sometimes we let it go. But we don't really know how to kind of manage them. And, we're not taught this. So where would we learn that from?
Mhm.
But it's interesting. So I have to do
Oh,
so much work of like I guess people's beliefs on feelings.
yeah. Right. Yeah. And like to your point, that comes from that early socialization, whether it in some authority figure, right? Whether it's a teacher, a preacher, a parent, um, it's usually one of those three, right? Like it's usually either kind of our early life or early childhood authority figures are usually parents, grandparents, teachers once we start going to school.
Yeah.
And then if families go to church, kind of those kind of interjects of God, Sunday school teacher, preacher, kind of what you're being taught there as far as like how we are to behave, right? And often for parents, right, there's a difficulty teasing out the behavior from the feeling, right? So, right, going back to that cognitive triad, those two things are different, but what I see so often, right, with this socialization is that adults get embarrassed by children's behavior. And so instead of differentiating between the feeling and the behavior and correcting the behavior or modifying the behavior and encouraging the feeling or allowing the feeling or God forbid validating the feeling, right, which is essentially, recognizing that of course you would feel what you're feeling right now, right, in light of your circumstances and that's okay, that is valid, right? It's a right? Like
Stop
put
it.
a pin in
Yeah.
that, right? Like hush, quiet, stop it. Children should be seen and not heard, right? I mean, the old Southern adage is even for women, right? It's put some lipstick on and handle it, right? Like you gotta like buck up, sister, right? Like don't cry, you'll ruin your mascara. Like, oh my gosh, right? All these little nuances, right? That kind of
Yeah.
teach us it's not okay to be a mess, right? And of course, I'm sure we could pick that apart, even right? How much mess is okay and how much mess is messy.
Yeah.
But
But it's all like super judgmental too, right?
yeah,
Like, I don't know. I think, part of why we have some behaviors that maybe we deem problematic, kind of going back to that triangle, right? Some of those behaviors are to avoid that emotion,
mhm,
right?
sure.
So
Well, that's
like,
really interesting. Yeah.
but
Hmm.
so when you look at, let's, I don't know, compulsive shopping, I don't know, I'm just throwing something out there,
Sure.
right? Every time I feel
Hmm.
sad or insignificant or whatever feeling, I go
Mhm.
shopping.
Right.
What that behavior is not a cure for that feeling, right? It's like I'm going to stuff it down and make myself feel better. It's like an avoidance of that feeling.
Mhm.
Sometimes our behaviors are a result of that feeling, right? Almost like a knee jerk reaction, right? I feel
Right.
frustrated, I yell kind of thing.
Yeah. Right.
But I think that's where it's important to really look at that triangle and how different circumstances play out for each of us, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not always clear in the moment of why we do certain things or what we're reacting to.
Mhm.
Or are we avoiding the emotion with our behavior? Are we leaning into the emotion with our behavior? Are we, kind of just lashing out as an expression of that emotion instead of finding an appropriate way to kind of express it or to release it? Um, and I know you and and this is kind of the conversation we had before we popped on, where you had said, like, this triangle, I find it's helpful. I'm like, really? Because part of me is like, this is part of our training. This is like,
Mhm.
I don't know, therapy 102. I don't know where we learned it,
Sure.
right?
I feel like mine was, yeah, it was like undergrad. I learned this and more like
Yeah.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like, of course, everyone thinks this way, but no, nobody
No,
does, right?
they
Like,
don't.
we're not taught to. I wasn't taught to. I didn't like,
Mhm.
we didn't talk about feelings in my house either.
Right.
But my parents came from a generation where that was not a focus. No, you cared how you felt. You were a kid, right? Suck it up. We do things.
Mhm.
So when they had children, they weren't super emotionally aware either. So I don't know. I guess I learned it. I don't know where it came from for me. Like maybe I learned it in grad school. Like I really
Yeah.
don't know, right? But and so 2 points to that. Like, right, we may not have the knowledge because we weren't exposed to it in our younger years,
Mhm.
but you can still acquire it and grow and use it
Yeah.
at any point in your life, right? It's like you may not have known about this, you may not have thought about it, but now that you
Mhm.
do, you can use it, you can go and you can run with it, right?
It's so empowering, right? I mean, I love that so much. I mean, I know from my experience, it's very, very empowering to be able to identify my inner experience, right? To put a label on that, to know exactly what is happening for me right now on the inside. Am I, what is it that I think? Right, because thoughts are just a series of neural connections, right? And just because I have a thought doesn't mean that that is a truth, right?
Mhm.
Or just that even if it is my truth, i.e. an opinion, right? Or my interpretation of an experience, doesn't mean that it's an objective truth, right? Or
Right.
that somebody else might share that with me. So even to say, like, instead of saying, well, this is right, just, well, I have a thought that this is right, shifts it. It gives you a bit more perspective from it, right? I'm having a thought about this. Or this is what I am feeling, right? I feel this, or this is what I want to do right now. I'm feeling the urge to fill in the blank, right? As a behavior. And then we can step back away and, oh, there it is. That's exactly what's happening for me right now. And sometimes we can go with that, and other times we can adjust it, but we have to really understand and be aware and be able to step back away from it first before we can work with anything.
Yeah,
Don't you think?
I do. I do. And I think understanding yourself from this perspective, right? Understanding that your truth, your interpretation is yours, and that, you and I
Mhm.
can have a conversation and hear it and experience it completely differently.
Yeah.
Right? Which
I
is
mean, I just want to let you know, but mine's always going to be right. Okay.
there you go. That's right. So, but this understanding that, okay, that means that if this is my truth and the way I interpret it, that you now can operate from the understanding that others may also do this differently, right? And I
Yeah.
think that creates a very different way of communicating and relating to others if you can understand that. And if you can understand the way thoughts impact feelings, feelings impact behaviors, and kind of again around that triangle, right?
Right.
Or the way feelings impact thoughts, impact
Mhm.
behaviors, and kind of in
Mhm.
every direction, right? So when you start to realize that, you can identify it in other people too. And that's where I think like the emotional IQ comes from. Because it's not just understanding yourself, it's understanding how others are also kind of living with this triangle,
Yeah.
and then how that impacts us. That idea of, this is another thing we've coming up a lot lately, is most of the time someone's reaction to you is not really about you, like with the exception of a few things. Like if you, Katie, intentionally did something to harm me, I'd have some feelings about it.
Right.
However, if you didn't return my phone call in whatever time I deemed you should, right? And then I create all these interpretations about it. From your perspective, it was like I was busy. It
I'm
has
so
nothing.
busy.
No, but like, you know what I mean? It has nothing to
Right.
do with you, but we operate in a way that we then
Mhm.
interpret other people's behaviors, other
Mhm.
people's, you're at the checkout line at the store and the cashier's super grumpy with you.
Mhm.
You didn't do anything. And we tend to internalize, like, what did I do? Why doesn't she like me? Like all this narrative, right? It's not about you. She probably had a bad day. Maybe she got a fender bender on her way to work. Maybe, who knows, all the things that we don't know, right? But I think if you can understand that everyone has these triangles,
Mhm.
then you can understand that everyone's impacted in a lot of different directions by a lot of different things, and it doesn't become so, I think it creates space for us to not take everything so personal.
Yeah, I like that.
Like, there are triangles doing stuff right now too.
Sure, her triangle is a mess.
It is true, right? We
Yes.
so it's so interesting because our brains like to fill in the gaps.
Mhm.
And sometimes the way it fills it in is like,
Yeah.
like that could be true. It could also not be true. And
Yeah.
yet we live as though it is the truth. And then we
Yeah.
interpret all these things based on that. Right.
And isn't it interesting how I mean, I guess I'll speak for myself. More often than not, what I witness in my own self and in clients is that that interpretation tends first to go to the negative, right?
Yeah.
Like you were saying,
It's
like, "Oh, she
protective.
doesn't like me. Like, what did I
Yes.
do to piss off the cashier? Like, what's wrong?" Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the positive, right? If somebody's not calling you back, like, "Oh my gosh, maybe she must be having an amazing day. Maybe she's on a date with her husband or having a mommy daughter date with her little girl, or maybe she got a massage today," right? Like,
Yeah.
don't
Never.
think about the good things that could be the
Yes.
reasons why people do what they do, right? Isn't it interesting? And I'm sure that's protective, like you said.
Yeah.
The brain wants to look for things that could be wrong so we can keep the body safe by avoiding the things that could be wrong and being protective of ourselves about them. But how maladaptive, right? Because we're creating stories. We might as well create good stories if we're just creating stories.
Yeah. Yes. But I think, right to your point, it's protective.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with having that first thought of, oh my gosh, she's so mad at me. And then you take a beat and you say, or
Mhm.
maybe she's really busy. I think that the struggle is when we commit to the story so strongly that that is the only story.
Yeah.
I think if you tell yourself a narrative about it, right? Of, oh my gosh, is she mad at me? She didn't call
Mhm.
me back. That's fine, as long as you can stay open to the possibilities that it may be something else and is most likely nothing to do with you,
Yeah.
versus, because that automatic thought, sure, it's protective, it's functional, like, yes, let's go with it. I think we just can't like commit to it and be like, that's why she didn't call 100%, right? Because then it impacts the rest of our triangle, right?
Right.
And how we start navigating our relationships or the scenarios that we're in.
Mhm.
um
Yeah, and if we're protective, right? When we're in that protective mode, then we do two things usually, or three, right? We either fight, which is attack the other person, right? We flee, which is be like, peace out, I'm over this relationship, or I'm over this experience, right? This job, this town, this whatever, right? Or we freeze, where we just absolutely shut down and stop engaging, right? And stop being effective in the world. And none of that really is a good place to be acting from, right? We should really be acting more out of a non defensive, right? Curious, open, grounded place than that defense mode. So that kind of like, it's interesting because that segues into something Rob and I were talking about this morning on our morning walk, because this is really, these topics have really been coming up for me lately in my life and my world. And, um, I've seen several experiences, both within my family, my friend circle, with one of my close friends. She was sharing some experiences that have been happening with her family where people are doing exactly what you described. There's a situation that occurs, right? And then, using the language we've been talking about today, this cognitive triad kind of comes into play, right? And someone has a thought about what has happened, right? And that thought then creates emotion. And in these circumstances, and I'll think of my friend's mother here as a specific. This has been kept inside, right? And it festers, and the festering creates more thoughts, right? Like, and you're saying more assumptions about other parties that happen to be involved. And before long, it's like the snowball that has been created, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger inside this one individual, right, inside my friend's mom. And then over time, this is just this huge festering yucky thing. And then by the time it's comes out, right, it's so big, and it's so kind of like infected, right, with this yuckiness that has just been like worked over and worked over with these cognitive assumptions and schemas and lenses that come into play about the negative about whatever it was that occurred, right, and all the feelings. And then so there's this big, all of a sudden, this wham of out of nowhere bad stuff that is brought to the relationship, right? And it feels like you get blindsided, or my friend was like, whoa, like, this is so surprising, right? And so unsettling to get this out of nowhere, this huge ball of emotion, right? And then again, people go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? Do you want to fight about it? Or do you withdraw from the relationship or cancel plans? Or do you just, usually freezes, you'd kind of say nothing and just, it was like, I guess what kids say, ghosting now these days, or even like the cancel culture, like, I'm just not, right?
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything. But it really can be just so destructive to relationships. And Rob was saying this morning when we were walking, like, why can't people just communicate? Right? Like that first missed phone call return, like, hey, are you mad at me? No, girl, I am not mad at you. I was on the massage table, right? Like, okay, awesome. Right? Easy peasy, done. Or
I think
yeah, I
because
am mad at you. Right?
okay, there's two things. I think on some level, we don't communicate. We, the broader peoples of the world, don't communicate because I think on some level there's a question of am I valid in feeling this?
Mm.
Because if you didn't call me back, and every time you didn't call me back in 2 hours, or again, I'm not that nuts, but like whatever time frame, whatever, right? If I called you every time, I was like, are you mad at me? Are you mad? You would be like, Claudia, knock it off, right? And part of me would be like, I should ask her if she's mad at me. She might be mad at me. And if she's mad, I don't know. Like, I feel like we get into our heads about it, right? Like, maybe that's not a valid feeling I have.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
that's true.
I shouldn't feel this way.
Right. That goes back to how we started, right? But you hear it all your clients, this invalidation of your emotional experience.
Right. Or so why would I share that with someone if I feel like I shouldn't feel this way. And I see that a lot. We don't usually have a hard time expressing what I'm going to define. I don't really actually believe any emotion is positive or negative, only the way we attribute them. But what we as a society deem more positive emotions, right? No one's going to be like, oh my gosh, that Katie expressed happiness, right? But when it comes to those other emotions that we somehow have decided are negative, we don't always feel comfortable expressing that, right? That being angry with someone, right? Feeling slighted. Hey, I'm frustrated you didn't call me back, or it hurt my feelings you didn't call me back, or whatever, right? Stuff that right down. We're not going to express that. I also think there's like a vulnerability in that.
Yeah.
That we're not comfortable with. And who talks like this other than therapists?
I mean, but you and I might say something like, are you mad at me? Or I was feeling a little sad when you didn't call me back, right? Because that's more of like therapist talk to people. But like, don't normal people say things like, hey, we good? Like, is everything okay? Like, we're cool? Like, don't people say things like that?
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I just think there's so much behind that. I have clients say to me something in therapy and they'll be like, I mean, I'd never say this anywhere else, but you're my therapist, so I can tell you. Almost like if I said this to someone else, there would be judgment, right? Or if I admitted I feel this way, I would be judged for having that feeling. And again, I always go back to everything you feel is valid for you. Like, this is your experience. Feelings happen. You can't, I mean, I guess you could argue we could manufacture some of them, but for the most part, when they're just kind of these spontaneous, like, this happens, oh, I feel this way, right? That's a very organic response that your system is signaling something's not right, right? Or something doesn't sit well with you, or you're feeling unsafe, or you're feeling hurt, you're feeling it's a signal. But we so often, in my sessions was like, well, I wouldn't tell anyone else that, right? But why it's okay, because guess what, those other people that you're not telling have the same experience, they're just not admitting it either. But we
Right.
don't.
It's easier to either to it's easier to just fight or flee
Yeah, yeah,
or freeze, right? It's easier to do that because there's a lot of energy behind that, right? There's a lot of fuel for that than to move out of that reactive place and go to a proactive place, right? And to address things effectively, to go to the person that has initiated the feelings, or like you said, look at the stimuli and see if you can talk yourself through it, right? If it's something that maybe is a not a relationship thing, or if you know better, right? Like, for example, you and I have been friends for a billion years, and I hear you making this little reference to me not calling you back.
it's not.
But I know
But I
we're
know you're not a phone
that's
person, and
exactly
like,
right. Right. So you know me well enough to know, because we've known each other forever, right? You know I hate the phone. You know I love being in person, right? You know, I'm busy as a one-armed paper hanger, as my daddy used to say, right? So like, if you were to go into your head about, well, Katie's not calling me back today, you could effectively talk yourself through in a positive way, right? Because you have A, the intellect and the internal resources to do it, and B, the knowledge of me and the relationship history to say, like, all right, well, like, we've been friends for a billion years. We're probably going to be friends for a billion more. She doesn't like the phone. She's so busy, right? We'll connect next time we're on Zoom, or next time she's in carpool line, she'll call me.
right,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
And so you can talk yourself through in a positive way. But I think that so many people, like, to your point of your client is like, well, I can't share this, right? And so when we don't bring things to the table, we talk ourselves into a negative of like, well, I have to either just leave the relationship, right? I had a client on my couch yesterday who was kind of having some experiences in his relationship, and scheduled with me to talk through those. And he's somebody who comes kind of as needed. And he was saying, I think I'm just ready to leave the relationship. Right. And he had gotten to that place unilaterally without ever bringing his concerns to his partner. Right. And I think that that is probably, more often the case, that when we try to handle these emotions and these thoughts that come because of relationship issues, right, or stimuli, we do put that negative spin on it because the brain's trying to protect us. And so instead of talking ourselves through it into a positive, I think more often than not, people end up talking themselves into a negative of like, I should just leave the relationship, or I'm really mad now because this isn't fair, it's not just, or that person shouldn't have fill in the blank, right?
Mhm.
And then it ends up being more destructive than productive.
Yeah, because you're also dealing with, especially in relationships, right? Whenever you're looking at, it's one thing if it's a stranger, maybe not, maybe it's impacted the same way, but you start looking at like, how are our, previous injuries triggered? Because that becomes another way. So you've got this, like, sore spot.
Yeah.
Someone responds a certain way, you have feelings about it, you have a narrative you create about it, you have a behavior, right? Maybe it's withdrawal.
Hmm.
You build a little bit of resentment, someone injures you again, right? Or touches that sore spot, because that happens when we have wounds, and we all have them. None of us escape life without wounding, it's part of being human. That when someone touches that sore spot, And if we don't communicate that, right? Or if we did communicate it and they keep bumping that sore spot because they just are fumbling around trying to figure it out, right? And then we stuff it, and we just stop addressing it. Because some of it is, I think people will say, you know, I don't know why I have that sore spot. So like my sore spot is people listening to me. I can tell you a whole long story of why I have that. That's my sore spot. So if someone is, my husband does this a lot too. He's a dude. So he like can, look this way and hear you. And I'm like, what did I say? And it's like verbatim, he knows he's listening. But I'm like, I need eye contact. I need your, that sucks. Like I need some verbalizations here.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts at this point when he does something that kind of bumps it because he's still used to interacting his way. Now it's just like, dude, it's my issue, right?
Right.
Like, it's my
Hello.
sore spot. What are you doing?
Mhm.
And now it's just like a running joke of yes, 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 you need to be listened to. Okay. We verbalized it, right?
Mhm.
But internally, and I still feel this way, is like, I shouldn't have that.
Mhm.
Like that is my deal to get over. And the work is on me to work with it, right? But to say I shouldn't be that way, like who's to say I should or shouldn't, right? It is what it is. So now it's just like a running joke of like, hey, eye contact, look at me. I want some
Right.
ahas, like whatever you gotta give me.
Right.
Right. And so
Right.
like we've worked it out in our relationship, but there's a million and one ways in which we carry injuries.
Yeah.
And we don't communicate them all. Or sometimes we don't know until someone pokes the bruise and you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that feeling? You
Right.
know? Um, but yeah, we really, and maybe that's part of it too, Katie, is why don't people communicate the issue before resentment builds and it turns into this big snowball that gets like unloaded? I mean, maybe it is that I don't know how to verbalize this. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know why I'm so upset about all of these things that have happened.
Mhm.
I don't,
Yeah.
and how do you verbalize what you don't know?
Mhm. Such a good question. You go to therapy so you can know it. Right?
But you do, right? I mean, and this is, this, yeah, I mean, that's part of it, right? The conversations that we have with our clients about feelings. I don't like go to dinner parties and have these conversations, but it is bringing kind of that awareness to it. And there's, I think if someone said to me like, well, this is exhausting to be this
Yeah.
aware. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but it becomes a muscle you use, right?
Right.
So when it's foreign to you, it feels like, oh my God, I got to think about my thoughts and my feelings and my behaviors, and it's all playing together. And it is a little bit of work in the beginning, right? But like it becomes, you're just building a muscle. And once it gets built and it gets stronger, it's fast. I can quickly assess my triangle, you
Yeah.
know, like 2 seconds or less. I'm like, boom, got it. Like it's not a lot of
Mhm.
pondering. So I think it's kind of, starting it, right? Like building up that emotional language.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I love that. Maybe we can pause there and kind of
yeah,
give a little, so if people want to kind of deepen their experience and exploration of this topic, right? Like,
yeah,
um, draw the triangle out. Like you were saying, you give people homework of like, okay, see if you can fill in, maybe find the wheel of emotion online if you want and see, oh, start tallying. Oh, there was a frustrated. Let me like, oh wow, there that is. Oh, I'm feeling angry about this. Up there that is, right? Wow, like I'm feeling really happy right now. Oh, let me note that too, right? And beginning to notice what are your go-to feelings or emotions, right? And we could do that with thoughts too. That's sometimes
yeah,
again talk about a Pandora's box to open, but um and then we can start linking the thoughts with the emotions and the behaviors all together. There's a
yeah,
little exercise that I love to use. I often use this in with relationship work, whether it's an individual who's coming to see me alone to address relationship issues, or if it's a couple that I'm working with and where there seems to be difficulty with that kind of self-awareness and then the verbalization of the self experience. And it's kind of a four pronged exercise. It's a spin-off on everything we've been talked about, but it's I think, I feel, I want, and I need. And what I'll do is I'll have people write down kind of those sentence stems, and take that home with them. I think, I feel, I want, I need. And as they move through their experiences and moving through their day, and they start to feel like, oh, there's something there, right? What is it? Is it a thought,
Mm.
right? Or a belief, right? Or an opinion? Is it a feeling, right? Like that hurt me, or that scared me, or that made me sad, or I'm happy, loved, right? Excited. I want, right? And this can be really powerful. I want to yell at you right now, right? I want for you to see my perspective. I want to eat chocolate ice cream, right? I want to make love, right? Or I need, right? I need to go to sleep. I need water. I need to walk around the block right now and cool off, right? The needs being kind of like those non-negotiables. That wants are kind of like you can delay them or you can indulge them, but needs are kind of like, oh, hold the phone, right?
Yeah.
We got to address the need before something, if we don't address the need, something not so good might come, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think, I feel, I want, I need. So there's a little like takeaways for listeners,
Yeah.
all 9 of you.
And
I
you
was
hold
gonna
on
ask you, do we have any more
for Kenzie who listens at 8 years old.
listeners?
Well, and I would just add this could go into a whole other one, but just I like to encourage clients to identify how they feel each thing, right? I feel angry. Where do you feel that?
Yeah,
Because
I
I
love that.
think it helps with a faster recall later.
Yeah.
Right? Anger, I feel in my chest,
Mhm.
fear, I feel in my stomach, whatever it is for you, right? That you can then tune into your body, right? Of, okay, you're feeling mad. Where do you feel that in your body? And there's no right place to feel it, right? Um, and understanding that, I think, also lets you read your own cues better, so that when you have a feeling, you can start to discern between the different feelings more effectively, quickly. Understanding that, like, sometimes, like, oh, I have a tightness in my chest. Ooh, what is that about? Right. But I do think I encourage all my clients to just get curious. Don't judge yourself for anything that comes up. Just say, what's that about? What's that telling me? Why is it here? And sometimes it sounds so silly, but like, you can get an answer,
Yeah, I love it.
of
I
what is
love it.
this feeling right now? Yeah. It's a loaded top. I think we could do like
It's so good though.
a thousand episodes on feelings, but
I know.
hopefully that's a starting point.
Yeah, we scratched the surface and we talked about thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? The cognitive triad. We talked about how those things can be initiated by either one or the other, right? They can interplay with each other and kind of create this snowball effect, or an external stimuli, like a thing that happens, an event, or witnessing something, hearing something, outside of our own brains can trigger one of these things or all 3 of them to happen. And this kind of hang up around what I should and shouldn't feel or think, or how I should or shouldn't behave. And that usually that comes from our early kind of socialization and education as children, for better or for worse, and that we can be critical consumers of that as adults, right? Or like you're saying, like even older teens, how emotionally astute your clients are, kind of stepping back away and saying, gosh, like I really wasn't given permission to be, let's just say, angry, right? As a kid, or to cry, but I don't think I want to perpetuate that. So I'm going to shift that now as an adult, right?
Yeah.
And then beginning to learn ways to validate our feelings and create safe spaces for ourselves and for other people, to have emotions and to express them in ways that um, work for them, as long as they're not harmful to themselves or other people, obviously, right? And then to be able to communicate effectively with one another from that place of self-awareness, when it's necessary. And like to your points, you've said sometimes it's not necessary, sometimes we do work it through, but being able to sift through all these layers to know, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what am I feeling pulled to do because of that? Is that wise or unwise, helpful or unhelpful, right? Am I going to do that thing or not? Right? Whether it's unilaterally or in relationship. So there's so much, but it's so good and such a nice foundation, I think, for anybody to begin kind of the next stage of their journey of emotional growth and wellness on.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not an end destination, right? It's like constant,
Mhm.
constant assessment, constant.
Constant,
It's
constant
a,
growth. Yeah,
yeah.
just when you think you're done, the universal God or divine or whoever you think is in charge will give you something else to work with.
Lessons need to be learned.
All the
Well,
lessons all the time.
thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes. We'll see you
Yeah.
next time or hear you next time.
We will. I guess you'll see us one
I'll
day.
talk to
One
you.
day we'll post a
No,
video.
you will never.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.